to conduct an online lecture series to help our students keep motivated. And we have already started our online classes, and we have tried to keep things uh, simple and profound at the same time. We have wanted our respected speakers to uh, choose such topics that would be relatable to them, and at the same time they would also enrich them to some of the profound aspects of literature. So on behalf of our department, I will be delivering the welcome address for Dr. Subhodip Paul, and our head of the department, Dr. Parthasarathi Guha. Unfortunately, he would not be present today due to some personal reasons. He would have loved to be present here, but he has not been able to do so. So on his behalf, I'm going to deliver the inaugural address. Dr. Subhodip Paul is currently assistant professor at the Department of English, School of Literature, Language and Cultural Studies, Bankura University. He had formerly taught at the PG Department of English, Maulana Azad College, Kolkata, and was a guest faculty at the PG Department of English, Lady Brabourne College, Kolkata. He was a UGC Senior Research Fellowship at Jadavpur University. His MPhil was on a re-evaluation of South Asian diasporic sensibility in Indian expatriate literature, and his PhD was a critique of East-West cultural polarizations in Indian English fiction. He has co-edited Anxieties, Influences and After, a collection of critical essays on post-colonialism and neocolonialism that has been published by Worldview Publishers in association with Wimbledon Press UK 2009. Finite Sketches, Infinite Reaches 2009, his first book of poems from Writers' Workshop, Kolkata, received critical acclaim. He was co-director of a 2-year major research project entitled Discoursing the Homeless Elderly, Tropes, Desires, Containment, funded by the ICSSR in collaboration with the University of Swansea, UK. His fictional and non-fictional writings have featured in Narrow Road Journal, Blue Minaret Literary Journal, Earthen Lamb Journal, the Four Quatrains Magazine, Northeast Review, the Sunday Fan, the Telegraph, Hindustan Times, and Luworth Press, Edinburgh. So, on behalf of our department and all our beloved students, I would like to welcome you, sir. Your presence really mattered to us a lot. It is a great privilege to have you here as our speaker today. Now I would call upon Professor Binoy Donger to deliver the introductory address. Over to you, Binoy.
Hello, Partho, repeat what you said.
Now you are going to deliver the introductory address, I think. Uh,
Oh, I heartily welcome our speaker, Dr. Subhodip Pal, Assistant Professor, Bakura University, and a very good afternoon to all present in this special lecture series. And today is day 2 of our special lecture series. In this platform, we have with us respected colleagues, their students, and our respected resource person. So already Parthopati Mandal have introduced and talked much about our respected resource person, Dr. Subhadeep Paul. Sir, I welcome you on behalf of the Department of English, and it is our pleasure to hear you. And I know that we have our long association, and we have contacted you a few days earlier through my friend, especially Abhishek Das, and you agreed so kindly that we are grateful to you, and this is our uh, gracious moment that we have now with us, that you are very kind to find your time to deliver this lecture on behalf of the uh, English department of our college. I now hand over the mic to you to deliver your lecture. Okay, sir.
Okay, so I would now request
Uh,
Doctor to deliver your lecture, please, sir.
Thank you so much. I hope the mic is functioning properly. Yep.
Okay, sir.
We
Yeah.
can hear you
I think.
properly, sir.
Yeah. All right. All right. I hope the audio and the video is functioning well. So let me, at the very outset, thank the entire Department of English, Berhampur Girls College. Um, I especially thank the Honorable Principal, Dr. Hena Sinha, and I thank the organizing secretaries, Professor Bhotok and Dr. Guho. I especially thank the conveners, Parthopratim Babu and Binoy, and of course the members, Koel and Kajal, and not to forget for whom I am here, my dear students. Um, I would also like to thank you a lot for calling me over. It's a very prestigious college. It's a very wonderful department that you have here. Uh, I was wondering on what particular topic would it be convenient to make a presentation. And when I was searching the syllabi, I felt that this would be a composite audience. You know, we have the some of the UG students, some of the postgraduate students, and I can also see, other than the faculty members, some of the researchers are also there, the PMPhil and the PhD researchers. So I decided to take up a topic, which never ceases to astonish me, which I love to read and reread over and over again. And quite surprisingly, a particular text which is readable at many different levels of interpretation. It's prescribed in some of the undergraduate courses, it's prescribed in some of the postgraduate courses, and it's also used as a reference when we, try to teach British literature that way, post-50s British literature in particular. So keeping that in mind, I decided to take up the issue of matrimony as reflected in the play, and I wanted to try to filter the whole argument of the issues of human correspondence, the issue of relationship in the play, the different kinds of relationships that we find through a retro-Marxist filter. But at the same time, let me also tell you that at the end of my lecture, I would definitely welcome all kinds of queries, questions, suggestions, and opinions that might also be tangentially or directly related to any aspect of the play in general. So, as against the escapist theater of his previous generation, G.J.V. Prasad opines in his book, The Lost Temper, Osborne's play was definitely more realistic. We have the issue of fourth wall realism and naturalism and kitchen sink drama as various terms to describe it. The pragmatism that I find associated with the play, especially in relation to Osborne's personal life, his failing marriage to actress Pamela Lane, and their cramped accommodation in Derby, the death of his father, Thomas, Osborne's idealistic drive to the theatre, contrary to Lane's materialistic ambitions in the cinematic world, as also his general disenchantment with women, including his mother, Nellie Beatrice, that accounted for some of the critics accusing the play of misogyny, his appreciation of the moral encouragement to write provided by actress Stella Linden, on whom the character of Madeline is based. These are some of the various issues which have a very strong biographical imprint on the play. Incidentally, divorced his first wife of 5 years, Osborne, Pamela Lane, to marry Mary Ure, whom he eventually, with whom he eventually tied the knot in 1957, but with whom he had begun a relationship after the first production of Look Back in Anger in London. And Ure also played the role of Jimmy's wife, Alison Porter, in the play, especially in the Royal Court Theatre premiere in London. This is 1956. And this was directed by Tony Richardson and produced by the English Stage Company. It was the British press who first used the phrase angry young man to describe the author, not the play. They used it in particular to describe the author in alignment with the 1950s movement that addressed writers and playwrights like Kingsley Amis, Alan Sillitoe, John Wayne, and many other such writers and dramatists. Mention may be made of the fact that Amis had written Lucky Jim, which is another very potential text that we teach at the PG level. Sillitoe had written works like Saturday Night and Sunday Morning, and The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner. And John Wayne had written, very famously, Hurry On Down. So this, of course, raised the most evasive yet pertinent question, which is raised in the play, as to why is Jimmy angry? My students have asked me this question time and time again, and I think readers and theatre goers have also posed this question multiple times as to why is Jimmy angry, against whom is he angry, what is his anger directed at, some of the questions that seem to be very evasive but directly or indirectly related to his quote-unquote anger. So is this anger solely directed at his wife, who doesn't subscribe to his idea of affiliation? Or is it class anger, which is basically the hatred of the working class against the stiff upper collar, upper middle classes, or the influential sections of the British elite society? Or is it simply anger that is misdirected, mismanaged, and without a point of referral? It is this matrix of romantic love as a universally cohesive force versus pronounced class stratification in socio-political hierarchization and hegemonic structuring of society that I want to stress upon in this particular lecture all the more, which necessitates a retro-Marxist reading. According to a particular critic, Sadegh Maleki, Jimmy Porter is perceived as the Marxist critic of the post-war society. And since Marxism predicates socio-cultural conflicts and contentions predominantly on the unequal distribution of power and the disgruntlement of the have-nots in conjunction with the exploitative aggrandizement of the haves. It also remains to be said that it's also given the fact that Althusser's formulation of the ISA and the RSA, the ideological state apparatus and the repressive state apparatus, the media, literature manuals, the police, court of law, they may be said to be in operation in this play at various levels of understanding. It may be said that these apparatuses are used to impose the dominant ideology of the privileged sections of society over the hapless working class and subalterns. Jimmy Porter is the representative protagonist deprived of his opportunities, dues, and possibility of social mobility, for which he rants, okay? And this ranting is not to be wished away as lack of refinement, breeding, upbringing, or even worse, class infantilism, but rather as the genuine alarm and rabble-rousing of the working class intellectual in solidarity with the ideal of a classless society, and in a desperate bid to awaken what in Marxist lingo is popularly addressed as class consciousness. Educated, cognizant of the existing social fractions, and critical of the national condition of Britain, Jimmy Porter is aware of the cannibalization of consciousness inflicted on the working class, that he refuses to consume and digest lying down. In Marxist superstructural terms, Jimmy Porter is aporetic, and hence he cannot get his agendas together. His very name is a contradiction in terms. He is jazzy and forward-looking, which of course the first name Jimmy signifies, but he is also bearing the cultural baggage of the past in his present, which is of course the surname Porter all about. Not to forget that it is the working class who bears the material burden of the privileged upper classes, be it in industry, war, or the taxation structure. So while Britannia was feeding on other nations such as India through their imperial policies, the English elites were feeding on the less powerful nations in the United Kingdom, such as Scotland, Ireland, and Wales, which of course, as we know, some time back culminated in Brexit and the mocking forte of what in a very popular discourse is known as the disunited kingdom instead of the UK. Not to forget also the economic exploitation on class terms back home. Now, this is a simplistic definition, but I'll still mention it that, in literary terms, we happen to make this configuration that in the United Kingdom, class is a very important issue of consideration, just as in the United States, race is a very pertinent, a point of the explication of identity. And similarly in India, caste is, at the topmost rank of conflicts and considerations of different kinds of social contentions. In fact, Henry Popkin, in the book The New British Drama, pointed out that emotional restraint was a sign of good taste and breeding before Look Back in Anger came on stage. Oleg Kerensky credits the play for the outspoken hero, uninhibited language, and the articulation of protest against establishment values. John Russell Taylor, in the very influential book Anger and After, notes the moorings of the works in working class origins. The post-war period had brought artists, writers, and dramatists together. And I did mention Osborne and Amis, but I'll also mention the name of David Story, and raising them from the working class obscurantism and literally through fame and fortune promoting them to the upper middle class limelight and rank, and creating also a sense of alienation in the process. On top of that, because of their working class moorings, these writers and dramatists had turned out to be conscientious naturalists and skillful documentarians. Marx had observed in German ideology, and I quote him, "As individuals express their life, so they are. What they are therefore coincides with their production, both with what they produce and how they produce. The nature of individuals thus depends on the material conditions determining their production. Critics like Kenneth Tynan acknowledged that Osborne's novelty shook British complacency and shattered the affected drawing room comedic mold of West End stage plays, especially those of playwrights like Noel Coward and Terence Rattigan. The working class intellectual was conscious of their existence in bedsits and terraces. Eric Keown compares the Osborne mouthpiece to a tripe butcher and describes his vituperative idiom on what he describes as the vocabulary of the intestines. Truly, Jimmy's reactions are gut-wrenching, and he has the guts to voice his tirades. So I'm punning on the word gut that way. But then tirades against what? What does Jimmy amount to? This is a fundamental question which is raised in the play, that ultimately what is Jimmy's public standing? What is his social standing? At least, and this is what I found out, that Jim Dixon in Kingsley Amis's Lucky Jim does get lucky and enters the mainstream societal circuit when he gets a metropolitan academic job. He almost enters the middle class strata, and he is also promoted by Ukuahat, and he eventually can break free from the clutches of the delusional Margaret. There isn't any such score at the collective or societal level that we find with Jimmy. And I'm incessantly focusing on Jimmy because through him, perhaps, we would be able to better understand the predicated relationships that he has with the other characters. This is not a patriarchal prioritization, in my opinion, but this is a sort of a critical filter which actually helps us in understanding the play better. Jimmy does rattle against bourgeois complacency, but he is an armchair critic, according to many critics. Jimmy is aware of the red brick versus white tile difference, which is basically Oxbridge universities on one hand, and of course the new universities on the other, who haven't attained that class refinement as yet. And of course the great metropolitan versus provincial divide. And of course Osborne pointed out to the dangers of his blistering honesty that alienates Jimmy Porter from others, even the best of his buddies like Hugh Tanner. But Jimmy is, and we have got this quotation from the text, he's an old Puritan at heart, not in terms of sexual prudery, which he rather abhors as hypocrisy, not his blaming his wife Alison for remaining a virgin till marriage. Jimmy's conventionalism is related to his old world values. Jimmy mocks everyone, sometimes genially, but mostly in a rather caustic vein. But he is never a deserter when it comes to the right causes. Although most people, including Helena Charles, his one-time mistress, as we find it in the play, cannot bear to acknowledge the truth as it is because it is unbearable. They all want to escape from the pain of being alive. This is Jimmy's constant accusation against most of the people that he considers important in his life, especially from the opposite sex. But Jimmy never enters the public forum in any capacity. Maybe because he doesn't get any opportunity. Maybe because his integral honesty comes up as a debilitation, making him undiplomatic, and mostly because he doesn't run away from his rightful duty, whether it be slogging at the sweet stall to run the family, not taking any financial help from his wealthy in-laws, taking care of his wife and his border brother, if I might say, Cliff Levy, attending to Hugh Tanner's mother, out of gratitude, or not emigrating to a prospective land, like Hugh himself, out of an inherent sense of patriotism. Jimmy's brother-in-law is a runner for the parliament. He is, contending for the MPship. He has almost become an MP. We are talking about Nigel, and it is very well understood that a recommendation from Nigel would definitely at least give Jimmy a college or a university job, to which he is most suited, as far as his internalization of knowledge is concerned. But he refuses to do that. He refuses to take that, in Hindi, what we call sifarish. He refuses to take that recommendation. He refuses to take that backdoor help. Mrs. Redfern signs over her daughter's property in her name. He doesn't say anything to that as well. Cliff doesn't provide for the family. He doesn't say anything to that as well. Alison, unlike Helena Charles, is not a working lady. She is not the new woman. Jimmy hadn't received the protection of a family patriarch, as mentioned by the death of his father. The examples are too many, as we know, that highlights Jimmy's defenselessness in multiple ways, whether it be emotive or whether it be material. Jimmy knows that with his standards of personal idealism, he would rather cut a sorry figure in the outside world. And he does mention that there aren't any brave causes left to fight for. And also that is why his expectations from Alison are steep high. A lot of readers and theater goers don't like Jimmy's coarseness and complain of his putting excessive pressure on his wife, especially his savage attitude, rather his savage verbal attitude towards her, even especially when she's pregnant. Alison comments on Jimmy's inscrutable nature. But is what Jimmy really wants that hard to understand? That is a question that has always perturbed me every time I have reread the play. That is really Jimmy that obscure? Or rather, is it that he is too easy to understand? And that is why people play this game of actually not subscribing to his values or his value system, because it's rather unbearable for them in a transitional society like that. Jimmy wants absolute loyalty and emotional dedication and social commitment from Alison. Alison doesn't breach her wedding vows, but her unsevered association with her mother and brother, especially given their lack of support towards the couple post-marriage, is what earns Jimmy's wrath. Even Alison cannot relinquish her upper-class snobbery, basically a sort of a superiority complex and arrogant dismissiveness of the working class, which I think totally, despite all the troubles Jimmy had taken to keep the family materially running, she even admonishes her husband in front of Helena, whom in today's lingo we might call her bestie, one of her besties that way. And he mocks Jimmy for being a knight, but in rusted armor, and brands his zeal to win her over as a zeal to hold her as a hostage, which basically means to get to blackmail the elite class from which she comes, which she hails from. But quite surprisingly, Jimmy never, and this is quite ironical, he never takes any advantage of her family that way. They continually suspect him that he would do so. But I think Jimmy, as far as the play suggests, had never really received any tangible help, nor does he seek it in any potential measure. And I rather appreciate this fact that even Alison's father, Colonel Redfern, even who is mocked by Jimmy as the old Edwardian plant from the wilderness, recognizes the stand of his son-in-law, and rather, if you note it very carefully, rebuffs his own daughter for being a fence sitter. Sometimes you have to take sides. And this is where people make their decisive choices. This is the moment of decision making or decision taking. And emboldened by her paternal family, not necessarily her father, in a bid to escape from Jimmy's incensed attitudes, having no work locale to immediately shift to, Allison departs for her parental house. Although conversant with her husband's premarital liaisons, viz. With the character of Madeline, for instance, Allison gets rather pushy that Helena Charles, her friend, should supplant her position to fill up the vacuum. In fact, Helena catalyzes the married couple's problems as it is she who takes the pregnant Allison away to her parents. When Jimmy goes to visit the ailing Hugh's mother, to whom Jimmy is more of a son than her own biological son who deserted her. Although she was the benefactor with whose donation Jimmy set up the sweet stall with which the Porter family basically runs, Allison does not build a good rapport with her or expresses her gratitude in any way to Hugh Tanner's mother. In fact, when Act 2 replaces Allison for Helena at the ironing board in an apparent live-in relationship, despite Helena's obvious passion for Jimmy under the veneer of Victorian matronliness, Jimmy's invectives do not stop. Jimmy taunts this relation as living in sin, as the church would brand it. Many of you might note that there is a very wonderful rock song by John Bon Jovi called Living in Sin, which actually mocks this whole idea of live in or live together as we know it, as something which the church unnecessarily mocks because it's not really living in sin, but living in love. But as far as Jimmy and Helena is concerned, I would rather put a question mark there, because the love equation in this case is very complicated. I find Helena having a very strong passion for Jimmy. I find that Jimmy is someone with an open door. He is not welcoming Helena. He is not stopping Allison. He is a person who wants freedom and allows freedom of choices. And at the same time, Jimmy is a queer mixture of, old world and new world values. It's not matrimony, the institution. It's not the institution of marriage that he values so much. Rather, I would say that he even doesn't recognize it as in institutional terms, but he recognizes it as a sort of a closure that I think a strong foundational love usually expects to guarantee. And I think that Jimmy has this feeling of having arrived at when his relationship with Alison Redfern at that point of time had materialized properly, and this is why he marries her. But at the same time, the irony lies in the fact that Jimmy, castigates, that too jocularly, no doubt, but kind of, leg pulls Helena Charles for this, rather offbeat relationship. But at the same time, it's the same Jimmy Porter who gets terribly upset when the, church bells are ringing, and he kind of rather gets irritated. His nerve starts racking. So Jimmy is rather, having a very idiosyncratic standpoint on these particular issues, which are both personal and social in nature. And having said that, let me also tell you that at best, Jimmy tests Helena jocularly, which rather shocks her, other than the fact that Allison's departure does destabilize Jimmy's emotional equilibrium. Sex is neither swept under the carpet nor overblown in Look Back in Anger. This is something that you must remember very carefully. Jimmy has the intellectual courage to credit Webster, the gay person, for being sincere, although homosexuality was still illegal in Britain then. This is what he says about Webster. He's like a man with a strawberry mark. He keeps thrusting it in your face because he can't believe it doesn't interest or horrify you particularly, as if I give a damn which way he likes his meat served up. So we get to know that Jimmy is neither upbeat or against homoeroticism, nor is he homophobic either. And he is quite live and let live that way. And Jimmy's lingo is coarse enough to sound misogynistic, but he is actually promoting an unveiling of truth, which is why he lashes at the subterfuges and schemes of the cunning Mrs. Redfern by describing her as, and I quote from the text, an overfed, overprivileged old bitch. All said and done, Jimmy and Cliff rant about sexual frivolity because they debunk Victorian prudery through and through. So adventure with Madeline is for Jimmy a ride with a female Ulysses. Cliff at the end runs off to try to hook up with a tart, or that's what he apparently says he would do, maybe out of a fit of I should say mental desperation, if not that way genetic. And in general, cheap cracks are made in true hackneyed music hall style mannerisms. I quote again, "Don't be afraid to sleep with your sweetheart just because she is better than you," unquote. The vaudeville and end of pyre music hall mannerism would feature in another play by Osborne, The Entertainer, where a washed-up performer, Archie Rice, takes on post-war British society once again. But the slapstick shouldn't make us reductive of Jimmy's methodical approach to unconventionality, for which even seasoned critics like Kenneth Tynan described him as, and I quote, "the completest young pup in our literature since Hamlet," unquote. However, Tynan also thankfully recognizes the frustrations of the post-war young Britons who expected much from the socialist cadre of Clement Attlee's Labour government, but were dismayed to find class hierarchies intact. Osborne, like the prominent leftist scholar and cultural critic Stuart Hall, had participated in the campaign for nuclear disarmament, the CND movement, but also saw the political impasse after the 1950s due to the rise of Stalinism and other malevolent forces in Britain. And we all know very well that by this time, the idea of Great Britain had shrunk to the idea of the Little England. Quite rightly, because quite obviously Attlee's political ideological position was very different from Churchill's conservative government's position, which was more colonial and imperial, promoting that way. Quite rightly, Alison tells her father that he is hurt because everything's changed, but very ironically and not so ironically, Jimmy is hurt because everything is the same. Something's gone wrong somewhere. That's what she says to her own father. And all this while social transitions affect the unit of the family, and we all know that the way social dynamics change over time does affect the operability of the family, does affect the motions of the family in both positive and negative ways, because family is also the most recognizable microcosmic unit of society. In the present milieu, we might even say that the individual is also a unit by itself, that you and I are also recognizable units, irrespective of the family, of the fact whether we have a family or we choose to name that family as ours, or whether that family is biologically inherited or socially constructed through any institutional affiliation such as marriage or not. These are subjective considerations, but having said that, the individual is a unit of society in a very recognizable manner. But Helena fails to stay with Jimmy because her old world certainties are destroyed, because she gets back to her shifty world of shifty passions, of the flux of weekly repertoire theaters. And she does mention very candidly that I can't take part in this any longer. Because in Alison's shoes, she realizes the pros and cons of a conjugal position. She and Alison debate over the fact that marriage is no more absolute and absolute control over the other individual. So marriage does not necessarily guarantee you an authoritative control over your spouse, whether it's the husband from the wife's perspective or the wife from the husband's perspective, or in queer relationship, whatever the equations between the couple might be. It never gives the other person a right to control the other person's life, but which oftentimes happens because of the perhaps quasi unrealistic expectations that the absolutism of romantic love often has. And the fact that we tend to filter almost everything in a relationship through the absolutism of love. So to say that you have to be a Superman or a Superwoman for your partner. Anyway, without being very caustic or without being very directly cynical, let me point out to the fact that when Alison and Helena debate over the fact that marriage is no more an absolute control over the other individuals, they also compare marriage with governance, political governance. And so the traditional idea of, the be-all and end-all of marriage, comparable with absolute monarchy, is no more highlighted, and Alison herself admits to it that, marriage now is like constitutional monarchy. So the monarch and the parliament have to act in tandem with each other. Like it's like a beat dance where the foot tapping has to be done in synchronization by both the partners. Without that, it's not really a solo game. Somebody would call the shots and the other person would simply obey. And given that, the idea of consent and consensus become vital even within the institution of marriage. So it becomes important to note that, sexuality or the lack of its fulfillment can become a ground for divorce. And at the same time, this is also true that marital fidelity would have several reasons of consideration. It is not a taken for granted thing. And at the same time, as it happens in today's parlance, marital rape would also be considered a very important issue to take up. And true marriage, as we would understand it, is not that of a pen and paper legal transaction. Neither is it about a very highfalutin idea about wedding vows and spiritual promises of religious nature. Although Helena turns apologetic about Alison's belated arrival when Alison belatedly arrives, and she does mention something like this, that after all, you are his wife and you have more right than me to be in his life. And Alison also, in a rather apologetic manner, mentions that just because I am his wife does not really mean that I can just sweep in his life and sweep out of his life whenever I want to. His opinion, his consent, his wish or wishes are equally important. So, she does arrive at his doorstep, but it's not that she just kind of barges in to supplant her position, although theatrically considered it might appear to be that way. It's not so. Marriage is truly functional, as Osborne points out, when the mutuality is cherished without any sidetrack involvement or dependency that might jeopardize the mutuality which in symbolic terms is pointed out by Jimmy through the idea of the cruel steel traps of the bear and squirrel game, which stands for instinctive love. But then once again, instinctive love, or love at first sight, or love which is basically a matter of syncing two individuals together, or a process where two individuals get synced together through their mutual vibes which are matching. All these ideas that we conventionally know of, they also need to be tempered with reason. Okay, so it is emotion and reason counterbalancing each other. The fact that love involves both pleasure and pain, and that one has to bear both to survive in this is the lasting lesson that perhaps Osborne provides us. So let me tell you that I wouldn't, when I read Look Back in Anger, perceive of marriage as only a patriarchal institution, or an institution facilitated for patriarchal advantages, or for the advantages of the patriarchs, or patriarchy in general, or for that matter, it's not only a one-way gain, like it's not just a gain for men only, the way, masculinity studies would also endorse the whole fact. Matrimony has basically survived over time because matrimony, in decisive terms, has been successful in conjunction with capitalism. This much is definitely true, that unless when you marry, you will have reasons, innumerable reasons to spend, and you will be under obligations to do a lot of things like take a bank loan, or take a car loan and spend on insurances of your family, think about your children's education, and the replication would be done. So this also means more of expenditure, and that's how markets would run, and that would keep on replicating in every age. But once again, when we see the whole thing from the perspective that Osborne's basic contentions with Pamela Elaine, were about the fact that Osborne never really thought big, majorly, with screen productions. He never really saw his art as a money-making game that way. Okay, while Pamela was very much concerned about how, what kind of material positions she would be earning through her stance as an actress. And perhaps this is one of the reasons why Osborne was more geared up to the theater rather than for the cinematic medium that way, which would be economically more potential. But I would also mention that Look Back in Anger has had its film productions, which of course were not that successful. And Osborne had also written a sort of a postscriptum, that way, a play called Deja Vu, which rather features Jimmy as a slightly, aging man, or in his mature times, not in his 20s and 30s anymore, but in his 40s and 50s. And if I am not wrong, Alison is his daughter in that particular play. The names remain intact. Jimmy is less vociferous in that play. He has somewhat mellowed down. And Alison does more of the talking. So Alison has, in a way, internalized Jimmy's rhetoric. But then even that was not so majorly popular. So the point is basically this, that definitely Look Back in Anger is a sort of a foundational play. It's a sort of a novel, gate crasher that way when it comes to the British theatre. Because the very idea of, the gentle upper crust British, snobbery is, duly not just deflated, but literally punctured by the arrival of, Jimmy Porter on stage. And this very, directly hitting rhetoric of the working class hero, okay, was literally aimed at shocking the complacency of the British audience. And I should say that this is where, Jimmy, I don't know whether it would be right to call him a Marxist, as many of the critics have done. At least I have issues with that term, because Marxism is not just all about Frederick Engels and Karl Marx only. It's not just about the pronouncements of Das Kapital, but Marxism has evolved in many ways over time, with many different critics making their own interpretations and making additions. We have the post-Gramscian take on this. We have the post-Althusserian take on this. We have the new left front, as I mentioned in a previous lecture, by the Cultural Studies Project Group, headed by the likes of Raymond Williams and Richard Hogarth, and so to say, Stuart Hall. And then there is also the case of Terry Eagleton. So there is a whole coterie of, Marxist criticism, which I'm not going into directly. But what I'm trying to point out is this, that Osborne definitely had, a potential socialist, aspirations, or a socialist bent of mind. There is an ultra-left angle to his pronouncements, and which is also mentioned in a very wonderful way at a particular juncture of the play, where he mentions that perhaps all our children will be Americans. That way, that they would be only thinking about me, me, myself. That way, which I think his friend Hugh Tanner had already given sufficient proof of. And at the same time, the American age would be already dawning by that time. So Osborne was very prophetic, and he was very, very, very right that the British Empire had given way, and the German Empire had collapsed, and ultimately it's the American Empire that had, got itself consolidated. And Americanism had entered the lifeblood of the Britishers as well. So despite all the socialist dreams, despite all the ideals of the welfare state in operation, despite all the food rationing and promise of jobs and all that, the basic class stratification, the basic class prerogatives of the British society into the haves and the have-nots, and the upper middle classes and the elite classes, and on the topmost ranks you have the royalty and the nobility. I'm not going into that. Maybe we can refer to Francis Bacon's essay on nobility for that. But at the same time, it's true that this was the era. The post-50s era was also the era of the rise of the working class. And whether it's Jim or whether it's Jimmy, the situation remains the same, that they do get social mobility in multiple ways. At least Jimmy does not get it professionally, because, of course, Jimmy is an extremist when it comes to his idealism. That's how life had turned him that way. And maybe because the reason why Jimmy attracts so many, people into his life, whether they are men or women, I'm sure he has an equal share of friends, whether they are men, women, or people from the third sex. It's just that because Jimmy is an honest guy, he has an integrated personality. He is a man of integrity in multiple ways. But at the same time, Jimmy is someone whose standards are not easy to live by, and which again is the flip side of his personality, that perhaps is the same reason why people desert him as well. So yes, Jimmy is ahead of his times, and my reason for pointing all this out to you is the fact that given this framework in mind, I wouldn't really say that Jimmy perceives his relationship with Alison in terms of a materialist marriage only. Okay, so when I talk about marriage and its alternatives, let us understand that a marriage is a marriage. A marriage is different from a live-in relationship or any other forms of relationships which are predicated as counter to marriage or as complementary to marriage in that way, like open relationships or the wish to remain single that way. I'm not going into that detail whether, like single people, what kind of relationship tags would be attached to their relationships. But then that's all a matter of personal choice. But having said that, let me also point out to you this fact that marriage becomes, as we have it in Shakespearean terms, a marriage of true minds, a marriage of true complementary gestures towards each other, a state of mutual recognition, if I might put it that way, and a state of arriving at a certain consensus, a basic consensus with how to lead life together. And being honest about that, not having double standards about that. So that is something which I think is all that Jimmy wants. And that is what Allison has consistently denied him, not by, taking recourse to other men for ventilating her romance or passion or thoughts and feelings, but in maintaining this tie with her parental home. Now, students have also asked me about this, that is it really wrong to kind of maintain ties with your parental home if you are a woman that way? It's not absolutely a crime. Rather, it's very natural that you should be maintaining ties with your biological parents and with your in-laws, because at the end of the day, both are parents that way, and you have equations with both of them. But the situation, whether it's whatever be the gender consideration, when the parental issue is in consideration, parents have to care for their children. This very idea that when children as adults take their decisions, and after a certain understanding, we realize that those decisions are true and entirely their own, then it's not that we can, just impose our wills on our children that way. We really can't do that. If your child is not heterosexual after a certain point of time, you really can't impose the standards of heterosexuality on your child that way. If your child chooses not to marry, you really can't impose such restrictions. If your child chooses at a certain point of time not to have children, you can't impose, you literally can't impose anything. That's the idea as far as the whole suggestiveness is concerned. But then we find that much of this tirade against Mrs. Redfern is because of her backdoor policing and policing into their marriage. And this is highly abominable, as I find it. And she is the matriarch of the family. So if patriarchy is wrong in certain ways, in many ways, in most ways, rather, then this is also the wrong side of matriarchy. I keep on asking this, that, well, it's really a smart maneuver and it's really a necessary maneuver in multiple ways to smash patriarchy, the way it has been demanded across various forums. But at the same time, thought must be paid as to what it is to be replaced by. It's not that patriarchy gets easily replaced by matriarchy that way. And even if it is replaced that way, it's not going to be functionally smooth through and through. Because at a certain point of time, societies were matriarchal and matrilineal as well. Many societies, patriarchy came about because of, capitalism's rise and becoming, almost like a pandemic virus that way. So the moot point that the battle of the sexes has to be resolved, the battle of the sexes, perhaps as Congreve's The Way of the World shows us, in a rather comedic manner, will never be resolved that way. But I don't see it that way. I do think that Men and men can be having healthy relationships. Women and women can be having healthy relationships. Men and women can be having healthy relationships and friendships. And it's not just about the binarization of men and women only. Everyone, irrespective of their gender particularity, can have a good relationship with the other person, provided they are valuing that friendship, that association properly. You have to value that in a decisive manner. And well, even if Cliff is considered to be a hanger-on in this context, we know that Cliff is given a very warm concern by his friend Jimmy, is given that refuge in multiple ways. And Allison does not deny Cliff his presence, because Allison gets a supplementary friend that way as well. Allison and Cliff also share a certain, friendship, healthy friendship, which Jimmy is permissive about. But it's the same Allison who just does not take an instinctive preference to like Hugh Tanner's mother, but then it's all because she refuses to accept the truth as the truth. That, like when I had married Jimmy, just as he has some material obligations towards me, I also have similar obligations towards him. And obligations are not just about earning money or, taking care of the family in financial ways. Of course, Allison is a very good homemaker, the way I find it. But it's also a question of affiliation. And that is where, her own father tells her, advises her not to be a fence sitter. By that, he means that don't sit in the middle, where you might be disowned by both sides. So a point might come when you would have to take a decision. And she clearly hasn't taken any decision because she is afraid of both sides. Okay, this might also have to do with a kind of a fear about the fact that she is not an employed woman, that she doesn't have an employment of her own. She doesn't earn money of her own. She is not, perhaps, despite everything that Jimmy has done, she has a basic mistrust about his class. Because this is also a kind of brainwashing that has been done to her, maybe from her class. And these are all the prejudices that the class feeds into us. As a white person has this prejudice fed into his head by his own family that blacks are villains. Similarly, like the upper classes may be constantly feeding this idea into their own sons and daughters that you should not associate yourselves with the working class. But then all said and done, the truth is to be learned from the facts. And the facts say otherwise. The facts do not really point out to Jimmy as someone who is a material opportunist that way. If he was, then mind you, Jimmy would have gone miles ahead, okay? Miles ahead of even, what in a very iota of consideration Jim Dixon had achieved in Lucky Jim. Because he had those connections that I talked about just a little while back. But all said and done, Allison is wished for a loss by her own husband, because Jimmy feels that Allison is so smug about everything because she has never had a loss in her life. She has never lost anyone in her life. Whereas Jimmy's life has only been a life of departures and losses. Either he has lost people because of their literal deaths, or people whom he counted on left him, deserted him. But he on his own never deserted anyone, okay, till the final moment when, as long as he could hold on that way. And Jimmy wishes that Allison would have a loss And this wish ironically comes true in the form of Alison's loss of her child, which again I don't know how to explain, whether she has a very sad miscarriage, or whether her parents get her to abort the baby because they don't like Porter, or whether they do something malevolent to her so that the baby would not be carried forward. There are a lot of suggestions, but at least this much is true, that Jimmy's wish is proved correct. Okay, so Jimmy kind of is also perceived as a child that way, who wouldn't be able to take care of himself. And that is why, as if like when Alison departs for her parental home, or rather is made to depart for her parental home with the assistance of Helena, then it is as if like Alison appoints a nanny substitute for Jimmy. That, you know, like you have a nanny for a child when both parents are working to take care of the child. So Jimmy is a child at heart. Basically, he has just grown up in years, so he needs someone to look after him. And you know, very conveniently, Helena slips into the shoes of Alison that way. But the point that I was referring to is that Jimmy mentions, if you could have a child and it would die, let it grow a recognizable human face from that little mass of India rubber and wrinkles. He's basically talking about the vaginal opening to the womb. So you can understand that his choice of words is very coarse, is very impolite at terms, is also very, I don't know whether it would be humorous, because some people would find it humorous, but some people might find it highly objectionable and politically incorrect as well. But one thing which is very sure is the fact that Jimmy wishes that Alison would know tangibly, not through indirect reference, what real loss is all about, so that she would also understand Jimmy's desperation for desperation itself, so that she could understand, she would be able to fathom why Jimmy is so clingy by nature. Okay, Helena might perceive Jimmy as futile. Helena says he will never do anything or amount to anything, and there is no place for people like that any longer in sex, politics, or anything. And I have a feeling that Helena's estimation of Jimmy is at best quasi-correct, not fully correct. Because Jimmy himself admits that I might be a lost cause in the public world, but if you loved me, and this he mentions to Alison, if you loved me, it needn't matter. Okay, so everybody might not be a public cut figure that way. Everybody might not be successful in life. Everybody might not make it to the bigger world outside. Our situations are not exactly complementing each other all the time. We don't get equal opportunities all the time. But the only thing that we can look forward to, other than the fact that we can actually take care of ourselves, okay, is the idea of hoping in love. Okay, so unlike a lot of these post-50s plays and novels where the idea of hope is in a way done away with, anticipating much of the nihilism, existentialism, and absurdism that is also in alignment with the post-war milieu. This should be appreciated that Look Back in Anger does end with a positive vein of understanding, with a positive appreciation and appraisal of relationships. Okay, so those critics, will it be correct to say this? Those critics who have called themselves feminists, perhaps in a very wrong manner, and have accused John Osborne of designing a patriarchal play which ends with his wife finally coming back and groveling at her husband's feet, typically showing that patriarchal superiority that the position of the wife is at the husband's feet, and all that. They have got the play all wrong. Okay, it's like when you accuse Othello of complete patriarchal prejudice only. Othello is definitely smitten by the green-eyed monster, jealousy, and that takes a very endemic turn. But the play doesn't end with his killing Desdemona only. The play ends with the understanding that there is this echo of the fact that he also kills himself, because without Desdemona, he wouldn't be able to survive. His love and Iago's love are, in that way, terminologically and qualitatively different. So they completely discount that rather Heathcliffish love that Othello has for Desdemona. In a similar vein, I think it's not just about groveling and coming back and the woman at the feet of her husband, not showing the typical courtly love, traditional mannerism of the woman as the goddess and the man as the supplicant. I'm not going into that, because that is rather a very coarse reading. That is actually a kind of reading that I would like to avoid. A reading which is both promoting misogyny and a reading which is also anti-men is something that I would studiously avoid. But what I would definitely recognize is the fact that Alison comes back because Alison realizes at the end of the day what Jimmy was trying to tell her all about. She had perhaps understood it in theoretical terms earlier, but now she realizes it experientially. She experiences the loss. Just as I keep on saying that the bear and the squirrel game cannot be played. The bear and the squirrel game has to be lived. You literally have to have that child-like simplicity, honesty, directness, and emotional affiliation with the other person to understand how innocent love can be, true love can actually be, if at all there is such a term. Not the term which is so much glamorized in popular culture in wrongful ways. But at the same time, this is the Blakean higher innocence that we talk about, the innocence that has got tempered by the songs of experience as well, the innocence that is aware in rational terms of the dangers of the outside world that are there, the innocence, the higher innocence that recognizes the fact that the entire world outside, whether it's familial or whether it's societal, or whether it is material or whether it is political, is ultimately malevolent to the very simple, space of mutuality that love provides. So if it is this loving togetherness that is actually a synonym for matrimony, that is the matrimony that Jimmy Porter and correspondingly Osborne so wonderfully advocates. So there is always a hope in love, a humanist hope in love, when truly recognized and appreciated, would condition marriage as something more than an institution, and correspondingly the other forms of cohabitation that I talked about, and even those that I perhaps left out, are rendered defunct without this equation. Without this equation, if someone asks me that what about the fact that if someone chooses to be polygamous or polyandrous, or whatever be the term appropriate that way, what if someone chooses to be poly and not mono that way? Well, even that is a deliberate choice, that is a deliberate decision, and even that would be a welcome decision in certain ways, but that wouldn't be a kind of a lifelong, tangible relationship as we would recognize through the verities that we are talking about. Well, once again, there is also this question or this idea that why has a relationship got to be lifelong that way? As against these questions, I think uh, what I should say is that the post-truth generation has brought us to such an impasse that we have begun to ask questions for question's sake. That is not what I would like to do. Keeping in mind the fact that relationships are equations that are forged, that are like plants and organisms, always in a state of growth, that need attention and not denial, that need care and affection. I think that is what is basically addressed in the play. And without these differences which are created by a false contestation of race, okay, I think the personal equations of people, whether they are Irish or Scottish or English or Indian for that matter, are ultimately, meaningless. The differences that we recognize, or maybe they are only surface differences. The real tangible equation is the sincerity of love. And this love is not always genetically or biologically guaranteed. This play shows us that sons leave their biological mothers, that mothers, completely strip their daughters of their parental proprietorial and financial rights, which is almost like denying her her decency or life support that way, in her own terms, given the fact that the daughter is not earning, and creating discrepancy that way. We must acknowledge this basic solo idea that love is the only sacrality that we need to recognize properly, we need to understand properly. Love not only with yourself, but love corresponding to other people, and sans or perhaps going beyond class, caste, race, and other such considerations, which would actually, in many ways, bring about a consciousness which is not just classless, but also an equilibrium for all kinds of people. So with that, I would like to conclude my lecture. There were a lot of things that I wanted to pack in, but I'm aware of the 1 hour time schedule. So I tried to, pack in as much as possible. I hope this will be of some use to you, and in trying to understand British literature, post-50s British drama in particular, and a generation which, even now inspires us in major ways, whether we are studying canonical literature or non-canonical literature that way. So thank you very much. I will now welcome any observations, questions, or suggestions that you might have. Thank you for your patient listening.
Thank you so much, sir. It had been a great pleasure, and not just a pleasure, but indeed it was quite enriching listening to you. So before beginning this interactive session, I would request our head of the department, Dr. Parthasarathi Guha, to speak something. Uh, he had been held up by some personal issues, but he had fortunately joined us. So over to you, Parthada. Will you say something, please?
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Shubhodip Pal. I have been fortunate enough to listen to a major part of your discourse on Look Back in Anger. And just before moving on to Thanksgiving and the interactive session, I myself have a question to you. Meaning, can this be a kind of observation or another way of looking at the drama? The fact that the bear and squirrel game, can it be said to be a critique of the Anthropocene? The so-called drama of humanity that is displayed on the stage, and the bear and squirrel game kind of critiques the perspective of the Anthropocene. So I want to listen eagerly to your take on that, sir.
Yeah. Um, yes, that's a very interesting question, Partho Babu. Thank you so much. Yes, that is rather a very intriguing thing that you point out, because when we talk about the bear and the squirrel game, perhaps a very vital constituent of the play in general, we do come to note the fact that this basic animality or animalism has been rendered in symbolic terms, so to say, because animals understand instinct. Um, it's mentioned as a game, like for my UG students, I would rather explain it this way: that you see, when children play games, they are not aware that they are playing a game. Like if I tell my daughter that, come on, now it's time to go home, or it's time to study, she wouldn't like to get up from that setup, because they are not playing the game, they are living the game. I'm repeating that phrase that I had mentioned before. And because they are living the game, it's so part of their lives. But as adults, we are conscious of the fact that we are playing a game, or this is game time, or unless we play games which are both genial and sordid sometimes, we will never be able to make our territory properly. That's the basic idea. And when they are, this couple is into this gameplay, they are at their instinctive best. Okay, because we must understand that in any such relationship where a romantic paradigm takes place so authentically, this is almost like, as you mentioned, a sort of a return to nature, or a primitivism at work. This is definitely a very I should say, not directly, but even an obvious critique of the Anthropocene era, the era of the Anthropocene, and or the era that was anticipated in due course of time, that with increasing specialization, mechanization, and the technological age, as the whole idea of Americanism is associated with hyper consumerism and everything, which again capitalism breeds. This is to reinstate the fact that man should be a part of the biocentric world, and not prioritizing his position as the roof and crown of all creation in terms of what the Anthropocene is all about. The very fact that we have done all the damages to nature is because we have had a wrong idea of what nature is all about. So yes, the bear and the squirrel game is also in that way a leftist paradigm in that manner. And the Anthropocene is also like the wrongful idea of marriage in conjunction with capitalism as well. In fact, as you know very well, that the high point of the Anthropocene is the high point of high capitalism, as we understand it, which is what we are suffering from now, and which is why all this fiasco and everything that we are suffering, and this very idea that capitalism would be like a structure that will collapse on itself, and then maybe there will be this socialist revival which would necessarily be taking place. And if not socialism in that sense, at least a certain return to primitivism that way. Like, this is my predication of understanding that in the near future, not even in the distant future, in the near future, a time will come when we will have primitivism and high, technocratism operating side by side. We would be having the post-humans romping and ruling the world, whatever is left of the world, and at the same time we would be having a sort of, a primitive society where people, the impoverished subalterns will be taking refuge, whoever will be left, and this would be a very, sharply classified society that way. So how to anticipate Marx's classless society is difficult to say, but as far as Osborne had conceived and configured the whole thing, uh, Osborne had predicated his understanding on the personal front, at a personal level. That, instead of first thinking about changing the world, let us first change ourselves. Let us first begin with ourselves. Let us first begin with the person who is most intimately connected with us. Let's say our, lover or spouse or a boyfriend or girlfriend, that way. Okay, or then we will come to our children, which in this case is muted. Even the death of the child is symbolic, because that's a child which is not welcomed right from the very beginning. Like when they're about to have the child, the first thing that comes to Alison's mind as she speaks out to Cliff is, oh my God, this is going to be a burden, an economic burden to the family. That's not how you think things out. But at the same time, what legacy are we going to give to our children if we ourselves have lived a wrong kind of life that way? Okay, so yes, the bear and the squirrel game is instinctive, but all said and done, as you pointed out, that it also spells out the need to exercise caution. The squirrel has been fooled, the bear has been trapped, but they have, thanks to God or thanks to their good grace, they have escaped the clutches of these traps, and the environment that would fool them, and now they are conscious. Now they would be still playing the game, but maybe a little bit more carefully, not so casually as children do. That's why we say that when children are playing, they need the supervision of the adults, and adults don't have anyone to supervise them, so they would have to supervise themselves. So yes, that's a very wonderful question that you have raised. Thank you so much. Anything else? Yeah.
Having said that, I would just take a few minutes opportunity. I ask permission from today's host and the convener of the program, Professor Parthopratim Mondal. I would like to say a few words that this is day 2 of our online lecture series. We began day 1 with Professor Swarnalata Rangarajan from IIT Madras. She spoke on eco-criticism, and quite interestingly, today you have spoken on Look Back in Anger. So we are very much grateful to have you as our resource person, and you have enriched our students as well as us as faculty. Having said that, I would also like to kind of communicate the fact that under the COVID-19 pandemic situation, like the other departments of the college, the Department of English, UG and PG has been conducting online classes under a regular structured routine provided by our college, and we are into online teaching, and we are following and complying with all the directives issued by the Department of Higher Education, Government of West Bengal, and our affiliating university, University of Kolani. Now I request for, Professor Parthopratim Mondal to open this session for interaction.
Sir, I would be selecting a few questions for you. I wouldn't be taking much of your time. So our student, Ontolina Rai, she wants to ask that we always tell a lot about Jimmy being a Puritan, but is his behavior like a Puritan? This is what she wants to ask.
Yep. Yes, Antorlina, that's definitely a point to be considered. But what you must remember is this, that when Cliff makes this remark about Jimmy, an old Puritan at heart, this is mentioned in a jocular vein. Like it's not that I would be instantaneously comparing Jimmy Porter with Oliver Cromwell, so to say. It's not that vein of Puritanism that we are talking about. But what like is being referred to in this case is this, that Jimmy's values are basically old school in certain ways. But at the same time, Jimmy also is, thanks to his education in particular, let's not forget the fact that just because he runs a sweet stall, we should not discount his education. He's a tremendously educated person, and I don't need to speak about his degrees, but I definitely need to highlight the fact that Jimmy, whatever else he has done, he has completely internalized his learning, and which is reflected through the various literary misquotes that he happens to give from time to time. But you must understand that Jimmy has by this time perfectly understood, especially with his relationship with Allison, that the upper classes or the upper middle classes that we are talking about in this case, they are a bunch of opportunists that way, social opportunists. I think most people are. That's not saying that it's only the upper classes who are opportunistic, but the thing is this, that their opportunism is fundamentally predicated on a standardized hypocrisy, which he abhors. Okay, because there is this constant jibe that is being put at him, primarily for his being a working class guy, or having working class moorings that way. This is the way I look at things that way, that I personally keep on telling in every lecture that my life thankfully has given me an exposure to the best of the metropolis and the worst of the provinces at the same time. So I have seen both polarities with equal measure. And one thing which I studiously maintain in my individual life is this, that I refuse to play by this game of the center and the margin. It is the marginal people who, if they are conscious of their propounded marginality. I'm not saying that marginalization is not tangibly there. It is in many different ways. Social marginalization is also there. But if we make our marginalities a case point for the vindication of our identity exclusively, we will never gain that centrality of attention that we are habitually seeking in whatever way it is possible. So my point is this, that Jimmy knows that he will not be able to become a Nigel. He will not be able to become a Hugh Tanner. Okay, he will not be able to be as shifty as Helena. It is not his nature to pack in and pack out the way at the most convenient opportunity. So in that way, he is an old Puritan at heart, and that is why he cuts a sorry figure in the outside world. Okay, but Jimmy knows that his Puritanism is, and why do we always think about sexuality when we think about Puritanism? Was the puritanical age only an age of sexual censorship? No, it was an age when freedom itself was censored. Okay, the theaters were closed, free speech was closed, any kind of free ventilation of speech was liable to be suspect as sedition or libel. much of it which is being done now. That is a very a wrongful rightist way of doing it. But I think Osborne is very conscious of the fact, and which is why I like him so much as an artist, is that the extremes of rightism, political rightism, and the extremes of political leftism alike create problems. You see, I'm not going into any political discussion today, but if you look at the problems that we are all surrounded by, you will understand that much of the discourse that we find in social media, or much of the discourse that we find in the newspapers or in the television channels or in the popular media, is basically a war of two extreme camps at loggerheads with each other. Whatever be the issue, there is a politicization of everything. And that is, I think, where we as the bourgeois, we fall in between. And in genuine tragedy terms, we get trapped between two collisive forces. That is something that we must avoid. Basically is free as far as choices are concerned. Jimmy has no problems if his wife and his friend are hugging each other, or giving each other a friendly hug, or having coffee together, or joining a conversation which is basically slapstick in nature. But he definitely has very strong viewpoints as far as affiliation, commitment, and ideological standing is concerned. He would die for you, but he would only want you to acknowledge that you know that he will die for you if it need be. But if he does everything for you and you don't give him that acknowledgement, that is almost a kind of betrayal. And if you say that that is a class betrayal, it definitely is. And that is what the upper classes have been doing all along. Okay, don't you think that the Conservative Party, which was in power for such a long time under Churchill, they have not only created major disasters abroad, like in India, they have caused the Bengal famine, which killed millions of people. And back home also, they were creating joblessness, situations of temporary loss and permanent loss of employment, for which the Labour Party came to power, because people were fed up with this great idea of rule Britannia, rule the waves, Britain will never be slaves. They did not want this idea of Great Britain anymore. They knew that Britain's role in international politics had shrunk to that of Little England. So now they wanted their home problems to be addressed. And that is why Clement Attlee was voted to power. So my due respects to the moderates in India and the extremists, whether you talk about Gandhi or whether you talk about Bhagat Singh, both were, or Netaji, all of them were responsible for bringing about our much cherished freedom. But at the same time, this is also a very major standing that this governmental change, this electoral change that took place in England from the Conservative Party to the Labour Party was also a very conducive factor for which Mountbatten eventually came, and then this whole signing over of things took place, and Dominion status was no longer a prerogative, and finally Purna Swaraj came. The partition was a different issue, which unfortunately took place at that point of time due to irreconcilable differences. But that is a major point that you have to keep in mind. So Jimmy's Puritanism is about his values, his value systems. It's not about the kind of free mixings that he has done or the kind of free life that he has led. And even if he has led that, let me point out to you, Jimmy was always pro the person he was dating until and unless, of course, that person left him or the situation turned otherwise where they could not live together. And I think this is also a biographical takeoff from Osborne in wonderful ways that I pointed out at the start of my lecture. So thank you for that. I think there's one more question. Yeah.
Yes. Pooja Banerjee wants to ask if Jimmy exhibits, quote unquote, a futile anger erupting due to the present day complexities.
Okay. Okay, fine. Now, see, this whole idea about futility, okay, because many critics have again pointed out, and once again, these are all the material minded critics, some of them are very reputed, that Jimmy is ultimately throwing stones in the dark. You know, why is he shouting? Will he be able to change anything by ranting with a breakfast table newspaper in his hand? Uh, After all, he is an armchair critic, you know, and we don't have any dearth of that in our own land, because we have always imbibed the colonial sahibs and the mem sahibs. We have also imbibed some of their value systems in that way, quite apathetically. And one of that is this, that we are all critical, you know, irrespective of the fact whether we are pro change in our actions, we are critical. Okay, বাংলায় আমি একটা জিনিস খুবই দেখি আর কি, যে বিতর্কিত বিতর্কিত কবি, বিতর্কিত চলচ্চিত্র, বিতর্কিত উপন্যাস, সবই বিতর্কিত, মানে একটা কিছু এদিক থেকে ওদিক মানেই বিতর্কিত আর কি। ঠিক আছে, তো এত বিতর্কের মাঝখানে কোনটা মানে বিতর্কের মধ্যে জড়াচ্ছে না, সেটাই আমার কাছে খুব ধোয়াটে হয়ে ওঠে। বাট all said and done, let us understand that this futility is something, if you're talking about material futility, once again, it's something that Jimmy had acknowledged. Jimmy acknowledges this, and he says that I might be a lost cause. Perhaps I am a lost cause. And he never says that I will be able to make it big again. And you are asking this question because you are young, you are still at the threshold of your youth, you have your whole life ahead. You know, you are looking forward with dreams. You want to be a big person down the line in whichever profession you enter. But a time might come in your 40s or in your 50s or in your 60s. I don't know when that time will come. And I hope it will not come. You will continue remaining this dreamy all your life, because that's what sustains us. But a time might come when you know, you would be reconciling yourself to a lot of the things that did not materialize in your life. Okay, fine, this I wanted, but it didn't happen. Well, fine, other things did happen. So that's how we you know, attune ourselves with life in general, and that way his futility is something which I wouldn't really mark him as a futile person, because as you see, when I talked about Lucky Jim, when I talked about Kingsley Amis, Amis does point out the fact that Jim Dixon is lucky in several ways. You know, he gets fired from his provincial job, he falls for the wrong woman, his conduct as an academic is not good. He is rather a very hippish person that way, as against the very stereotypical idea of an academic that we know of, who is supposed to be very prim and proper and very cordial about everything, very upright about everything that way, and of course will not be controversial in nature, as I just pointed out. But fact hardly remains like that. You know, the truth is this, that even academics have their own lives. They're also human beings. Film stars are like that, writers are like that. People have human qualities, and people have human failings. You know, you have to accept that and move on. You mustn't really be sitting with the controversy all day long. So this anger is not futile. That's my point, because a whole generation was recognized for this anger. Okay, all of them did not turn it futile. Okay, a party might fail, but the ideology doesn't fail altogether. Okay, that's why I said that the extremes of rightism and the extremes of leftism are harmful for us. I never said that rightism itself or leftism itself is wrong. Otherwise, we would be having no ideology in the first place. We need balance, we need cohabitation, we need coexistence, peaceful coexistence, whether it be among the genders or whether it be among the castes or the classes. we need peaceful coexistence instead of things coming at loggerheads with each other. And that is the reason why I pointed out in another lecture that even Stuart Hall, despite his leftist leanings, at a certain point of time, he was very critical of the fact that leftism might be lifted by the Labour Party and turned into Thatcherism. That way that it might be turned into actually a hypocritical guise for promoting the interests of the upper classes that way. So you need a constant mobilization of resources. Okay, Jimmy fails on certain counts because he was destined to fail. As I keep telling you that too much of realism and too much of idealism might be both baneful. Just as it is often said that too less of love and too much of love are both threatening in that way. Both can kill you that way. But when we want something, we actually want a lot of it, and we want a surfeit of it. We want a fulfillment with it, and that is what he is wanting. So his expectations from life are very well defined. And towards the end of the play, we understand that. He gets that. This is a happy ending, I should say. So we should not misconstrue this ending for any kind of ulterior and erroneous theoretical paradigm that we would want to impose on it from the external source. So that's how I would look at the whole thing. Yeah.
Okay. Mohar Mukherjee has a very interesting question or observation that can we consider this one-room apartment, this dingy one-room apartment where they are living, as symbolic of the subconscious, as revealing the inner subconscious of these characters?
Yeah, thank you, Mohar. Yes, well, Look Back in Anger also has a psychoanalytical, reading or several psychoanalytical readings that I have encountered. And one of the most, strongholds of psychoanalytical criticism in Look Back in Anger are Jungian interpretations and Freudian interpretations of the same. Jimmy's basic infantilism of nature has been viewed as, a return to the womb complex that way. Is basically, it's the kind of shock that Freud talked about when a child is born. Literally the fetus is expelled from the womb, so it's a shock at a strange world. And Jimmy, as Osborne also faced it in his own life, had maternal issues in his life, issues to do with improper maternity and all that. I'm not going into that. And even Allison mentions to Helena at one point of time something like this, that he wants a kind of cross between a mother and a henchwoman and all that. Whatever it might be, this tripartite categorization of the mind into the conscious, the subconscious, and the unconscious, the ego, superego compartmentalization that has been pointed out is very much there. Okay, and if you want to make a symbolic reading, you might, in that sense, like you might treat the entire society as the broad unconscious, where everything is taking place, and which is also the repertoire of all our thoughts and feelings combined together. And you might take the Victorian mansion as the conscious mind, because Victorianism was all about consciousness and predicated on balance, and neither getting too imaginative nor getting too reasonable, and all that stuff that we have talked about. So the envelope of Victorianism is also there, and basically the inner core of modernity, because modernity is predicated on the wrongful turnout of the war period, the between the wars period. But modernism the art movement was basically a shocker. It was an eye opener, and it was basically conditioned by a turning inwards because there was nothing left to turn outwards to that way. So, in conjunction with that idea where we are turning inwards, and we are actually taking a dip into our subconscious minds and beings that way, whether you consider that epistemologically or ontologically. Uh, that flat might be considered that nuclei or that nucleus where these primal transactions are being made. But at the same time, it is also the social unconventionalities that are at this point of time in a gestation state. Okay, and this would, at that point of time, maybe it was an exception or it was on the fringes. Now it has become the norm, and this is how things would be understood. That's why I pointed out towards the start of this play that for a lot of theater critics, this was a shocking, stage presentation. So what are you doing? You're beginning with a woman ironing clothes and a couple of men smoking cigarette, and the smoke from the fags rising up and creating a sort of halo. This is too crass to promote on stage, and mind you, the stages are also in Britain very classy stages that way. There has to be some kind of refinement that you need to present. But this was a veritable truth because Osborne himself, with Pamela and later with his next wife, he was living in a one-room apartment in Drury. And Osborne knew what it was to live in a very shifty manner. Let me point out this to you that I have several friends who are of my age as well as my juniors and seniors alike, who are very famous poets and writers or script writers for movies, and some of them are based in Mumbai and Delhi. And I have this opinion that they are, very posh people that way. They are intellectually posh, but I'm really very shocked to know that the kind of lifestyles they have is something that I won't even be able to dream of that way. Okay, because they have reconciled to this fact that even in their mid 40s, they are still living on house rent, and they are, still unsure about a lot of things in their lives. But let us understand that this is the life of an artist. Okay, let us understand that this is often what is required when you are fighting for certain things on an ideological platform. So yes, I would take your opinion as far as psychoanalytical interpretations are concerned, but let us also be aware of the fact that this is a pregnant pause moment that way, where the fetus would form and take birth gradually, because the subconscious also needs a ventilation. As you know, there are theories like the safety valve theory and all that, and the carnivalesque and everything, where a certain ventilation is always there, without which this would turn into literally a pressure cooker bursting on itself. So whether you call this a psychological ventilation or a social ventilation or a sexual ventilation or a psychosexual ventilation is a different matter altogether. But this has been provided. However, all said and done, I would also, since I have pointed this out symbolically, also point out to the fact that a proper synthesis of the classes does not take place, and at that moment when the child is conceived, and that is the reason why the child dies. Jimmy and Allison's child. Okay, this is not to say that they might not have children in future. This is not to say that if they remain a childless couple, they will remain incomplete. I'm not saying that either. But at that predicated moment, symbolically considered, the class unification, the classless society that is predicated in Marxist terms would only be possible and enabled through an equation of love, through an equation of understanding that love would promote. And that was yet to be born, So the shell of Victorianism remained, yes, it is a one-room flat where a lot of unconventional things are happening. But at the same time, let us also understand that the envelope of Victorianism is around them. So they have not been able to, like a chicken bursting from an eggshell. They have not been able to burst out completely and properly as of then. So that has to be taken into account as well. Thank you, Mohan. Thank you for your question.
Okay, sir, I am tempted to ask a question myself, sir.
Surely. Go ahead. Yeah.
So, can we not consider this act of looking back as a nostalgia for the centers that have been decentered? Because I think beneath all this grudge that Jimmy seems to hold, there is a spiritualist in Jimmy. And when Jimmy talks about the first meeting that he had with Alison, he says that he was attracted by the relaxation of her soul. And later on, he says that I was deceived because she had never had done anything that would even displace a single hair from her head. So isn't he a spiritualist looking for spiritual solace, looking for those centers that have been decentered? I would want you to say something on this, sir.
Yes, very well pointed out. Definitely very well pointed out. Of course, but then, I would also add to your comment. I definitely agree whatever you say. But I would also add to your comment and point out that it's not only Jimmy, who is that way a soul seeker. And since you mentioned this particular quotation, that relaxation of soul, it also points out to this idea that perhaps Alison's class, for whatever material aggrandizement and accomplishment that it might have had or would be having, her brother is a very successful figure that way. I'm just giving you a slight example. Today there was a house in front of my house here that had 2 mahogany trees, and they raised trees, they cut it off again. So one of the trees that were felled, much to my pain, though it's beyond my property and I couldn't really say anything other than informing the forest department, is the fact that one of the purchasers happens to be a member of parliament, happens to be an MP. And we know that mahogany trees can go up to a lot of lakhs in Indian currency, maybe 5 lakhs, 10 lakhs, or something like that when they're full grown. So this is the state of affairs, who are the elites, who are the people who are in power now that Cornell Redfern's generation is no more, now that the Edwardian twilight is almost fading. It's the people whom are our elected representatives. So instead of thinking about the working classes, these people, they were rather promoting the interests of the business class or the elite class, the British Parliament itself being fractured into 2 halves, as you know very well, Lords and Commons that way. But then, yes, it is that spiritual ennoblement, it's that pacificism that perhaps draws Alison towards Jimmy. It has to be some kind of attraction principle, which I think starts even before the play starts, or has happened even before the play has happened. But there is always this mutual attraction of for people who are unlike us, unlike poles attract, so unlike classes attract, that way, if I might put it. But then, since you mentioned that, this is also true that at one point of time, Allison also mentions that I was perhaps rather, suffering an illusion. Jimmy was actually not at all a relaxed soul. Rather, he is this eternally, quarrelsome, angry young man. And at the same time, I thought him to be that knight in shining armor who would rescue me. But ultimately, he did rescue me, but I was profoundly hurt by his rusted armor. And she does make this jibes against him. Like, people have every democratic right to say whatever they want, but it hurts when you are accusing people who are taking care of you in every possible way, done. Because whatever else it might be, Allison has married Jimmy. Allison is living her days on Jimmy's hard-earned income. Well, I'm not saying that I am reinforcing or reinstating the patriarchal stereotype where the bread earner or the breadwinner gets all the prerogatives, because as the homemaker she has equal share of claim in everything. But what I'm trying to say is this, that there is always this problem in every family as to how the family would run for the next month. Every lower middle class family, every normal bourgeois family would be tremendously terrified if the salaries did not come in time, or if in business there have been losses. So upon whom is the onus on? It is on Jimmy, and Allison has not received any help. This is the kind of thing that I wanted to. This is the point that I wanted to talk about. So, is it that Allison only dreamt of things without really knowing what they meant? And there is a point at the human at the textual level where Jimmy says that I wish you would wake up from your beauty sleep, and see reality as it is. So veritably, Jimmy calls his wife a sleeping beauty. So reinstating that idea that life is not only about fairy tales. Life should be made into a fairy tale, but life is not only about fairy tales. Life is also about real hardcore problems. And you cannot remain a Snow White in this kind of a situation. You would have to wake up, you would have to support me. If not financially, you would have to encourage me. You would have to be by my side and understand what I am really wanting, what is causing me discomfort. There has to be this exchange between husband and wife, this friendly discourse, which is very sadly thwarted. So that's the way I would think that the spiritual engineering would be taking place only after Allison returns and because
I think there is some issue of it.
Sir, only that due to this problem, he 2 minutes from another device he is joining us.
Okay, so we will wait for 2 more minutes for him. Please have patience, and would all like to express our gratitude to our students who have been so patiently listening to this lecture.
Hello.
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Yeah, yeah. We can trail off from here. I think it's more or less over, but if there are any more other questions, because since I had another talk today, the net pack got over. Uh, so, are there any more observations or questions or comments? Yeah,
No, no, sir. We don't have any
yeah.
more
Thank
observations.
you.
And we would like to conclude our session for today. And it has really been a privilege as a teacher. I am really, I really admire the kind of passion and enthusiasm that you exhibited in your lecture. It was very apparent in the way you delivered the lecture and you addressed the questions. It really revealed your dedication or passion as a teacher, and we would really like to have you in future when we uh, probably would be able to arrange another seminar or discussion. We would be very honored if you would like to join us, or it would
Thank
be
you.
an
Thank you
honor
so much.
if you visit us someday, sir.
Surely, sure.
Uh, so I now formally declare this session to have ended. Thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, sir, for being here. Thank you, Koel, Binoy. Thank you, Parthoda, for being here. And this is how we end today's session. Thank you.
Thank you.